The engineers had been at it for 3 weeks when Maya walked into the room. She was 11 years old, wore her hair in 2 braids, and was carrying a can of ginger ale she had taken from the break room refrigerator because nobody had told her she could not. She had come to her mother's office because it was a teacher development day at her school, and the alternative was staying home with her grandmother, who loved her very much and watched home improvement programs at a volume that Maya found incompatible with thinking. Her mother, Dr. Sandra Park, was the director of software systems at Veritek Data Solutions. She was also, on this particular Wednesday in February, one of 6 engineers sitting around a conference table covered in printouts, surrounded by 3 whiteboards dense with notation, in the 4th hour of what had become a daily ritual of examination and non-resolution. The problem was a memory allocation anomaly in Veritek's flagship data processing platform. It appeared under specific load conditions, manifested as a performance degradation that was significant enough to affect client SLAs, and had resisted 3 weeks of systematic diagnostic work by a team that included 2 engineers with PhDs, a specialist contractor from Austin who billed at $400 an hour, and Sandra Park herself, who had been writing system software for 18 years. Maya sat down in an empty chair at the corner of the table. She sipped her ginger ale. She looked at the whiteboard. Nobody paid attention to her. This was normal. Maya was accustomed to being in rooms full of adults who were thinking about other things. She looked at the whiteboard for 7 minutes. Then she said, "Why does that loop run before the buffer check?" The room was not immediately transformed. This is important to say because the version of this story that spreads through corporate hallways tends to compress the moment. The child speaks, the engineers turn, the solution arrives in a flash of embarrassing simplicity. That is not what happened. What happened was, Sandra looked up from the printout she had been reviewing for the 4th time that morning, registered that her daughter had spoken, and said, with the patient distraction of a parent whose mind is mostly elsewhere, "What do you mean, bug?" "The loop," Maya said. She pointed at the whiteboard. The 3rd whiteboard, on the right, which showed a simplified version of the memory allocation sequence. "That one. It runs before the check that decides if the buffer is ready. Why does it run before?" Dr. James Osei, one of the 2 PhDs, 12 years of systems engineering experience, the specialist who had been brought in specifically for this problem, looked at the whiteboard. He looked at it for a long time. "It runs before," he said slowly, "because when we refactored the initialization sequence last quarter, we moved the loop up to improve startup time. The buffer check was downstream of the loop in the original architecture." "But if the buffer is not ready," Maya said, "and the loop runs first, what happens to the data the loop is trying to put somewhere?" Dr. Osei was very still. "It gets held in a temporary allocation," he said, "and when the check runs and says the buffer is ready, does the temporary allocation release correctly?" Dr. Osei turned to look at Sandra. Sandra was already opening her laptop. Maya's question was not the solution. This is the second important thing to say, because the story loses something essential if the child is simply the answer. She was not the answer. She was the question, the specific question, asked from a position of not knowing enough to assume that things were the way they were for good reasons, that unlocked the answer. The answer took another 4 hours. Dr. Osei and Sandra spent those 4 hours tracing the temporary allocations release sequence through the refactored initialization code, looking for the specific condition under which the release failed to occur correctly. They found it at 6:47 p.m., a race condition in the release trigger that only manifested when a specific combination of load conditions compressed the timing window between the loop completion and the buffer check to below a threshold that the release trigger had not been designed to handle. The temporary allocation did not release. It accumulated. Under sustained high load, with the timing window compressed repeatedly, the accumulation produced the memory degradation that had been crashing client SLAs for 3 weeks. The fix was 11 lines of code. Maya had gone home with her grandmother at 4 o'clock before the fix was confirmed, because she had a book report due the following morning and had not yet written it. She had finished the ginger ale and left the empty can on the conference table because she had become absorbed in a book she had found in her mother's office, a history of early computing that someone had given Sandra as a professional gift and that Sandra had never read, and had forgotten about the can entirely. Sandra called her at 7:15 p.m. after the fix had been confirmed through testing. "We found it," Sandra said. "Oh, good," Maya said. She was writing the book report. "What was it?" Sandra told her. "So the loop was running before the buffer was ready," Maya said. "Yes, I thought so." "Maya." "Yes. Why did you notice that? Out of everything on the whiteboard, why did that stand out to you?" A pause. Sandra could hear her daughter thinking, the specific texture of Maya's thinking pauses, which she had been able to identify since Maya was 4 years old. "Because it seemed like the wrong order," Maya said finally. "When you are getting ready for something, you check that the thing is ready before you start. If you do not check first, you might be doing work that has nowhere to go." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "That is exactly right," she said. "Mom." "Yes." "Can I use the rest of your laptop battery? Mine died." The stories spread through Veritek the way these stories spread. At first as a technical anecdote told by the engineers in the room, becoming slightly more vivid in each retelling until the version circulating by the end of the week had Maya producing the solution in real time while the engineers sat open-mouthed around her. Dr. Osei, who was a precise man and found inaccurate stories professionally irritating, corrected the version wherever he heard it. "She asked a question," he said. "One question. We had asked ourselves many questions over 3 weeks. The difference was that her question came from not knowing the answer, which meant it was not constrained by our assumptions about what the answer could be. This was the more accurate version and also, in several ways, the more interesting one. Sandra had a different version, which she did not share professionally but which she thought about for a long time afterward. Her version was this. Maya had walked into a room full of people who had been looking at the same information in the same ways for 3 weeks. She had looked at it fresh, without history, without the accumulated weight of 3 weeks of failed approaches creating invisible constraints on what was thinkable. She had not known that the loop's position was the result of a deliberate architectural decision. She had only known that the loop's position seemed like the wrong order, and she had asked why. The question that changes everything is almost never the cleverest question. It is almost always the most direct one. The one that seems too simple to ask, that seems like it must already have been considered, that an expert would be embarrassed to surface because it implies they have missed something obvious. Experts had been in that room for 3 weeks. An 11-year-old had walked in with a ginger ale and asked the obvious question. Veritek's CTO, a man named David Cho, who had been in the building when the fix was confirmed and who had the quality of someone who understands what things mean, asked Sandra for a formal account of what had happened. She wrote it up, accurately in the version Dr. Osei would have approved. David read it twice. Then he asked Sandra, "Does your daughter know she would like to be an engineer?" "She is 11, Sandra said. "Yes," David said. "I am asking what she thinks she wants to be." "This week," Sandra said, "she wants to be a marine biologist. Last month it was an architect. The month before she was going to be a chef." David nodded. "Tell her from me," he said, "that she already is an engineer. She just does not know it yet." Sandra passed the message along that evening. Maya considered it. "Does it pay well?" she asked. Sandra laughed. "Yes," she said, "it pays well." "Okay," Maya said, and went back to her book about early computing. The refactored initialization sequence was redesigned in the week following the fix, with the buffer check repositioned before the loop in all relevant allocation paths. The performance degradation that had been affecting client SLAs for 3 weeks was resolved completely. No client was lost. The specialist contractor from Austin was released from his engagement 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Dr. Osei sent Maya a thank you note. He sent it to her school address, which Sandra provided, and he wrote it by hand because he had decided that this was the appropriate medium for the appropriate circumstance. The note said that she had asked the right question at the right moment, and that this was, in his professional opinion, the most valuable thing a person could do in a technical problem-solving environment. Maya read the note twice. She put it in the box where she kept things that mattered, between a photograph of her grandmother and a ribbon from the regional science fair she had won the previous spring. She thought about what Dr. Osi had said. She thought, "Asking the obvious question is only hard if you are afraid it is too obvious. If you are not afraid of it, it is just a question." She went back to the early computing book. There was a lot more to read. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that the most valuable thing in any room is a fresh question asked without fear, please share it today with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have a story of your own, write to us at heartlinestories@gmail.com. Every heart has a story worth telling. This is HeartLine Stories, where yours matters.